The book that really changed my course of my life, I always say, when I was in high school, was Michael Cunningham's A Home at the End of the World, which features one gay character, one bisexual character kind of, and then a straight woman, and how they try to make a home for themselves. It's an amazing book. I read it as a young adult. It's not a young adult book, but I don't see why those lines can't be blurred. Anyways, I'll stop.
Right. I'm going to be pretty brief, because I feel like everything's been covered. I think as a writer, you approach things a little differently than an academic, because you're not looking for, or an agent, because you're not looking for specific projects. What you're doing is coming up with stories that, sort of take you unaware. I mean, for example, as a teacher, if I'm planning out a syllabus, I'll be very careful to try and make sure that, people of different gender and different sexuality and different races are all represented as authors and characters in the syllabus. But I think as a writer, you come at it sort of drawing from your own experience and the stories that you want to tell. That being said, when my first young adult book came out, there was a very important character, but I thought a very peripheral character who was gay. And I was astonished when the book was nominated for a Lambda Award. And I thought, this is, I love the character and I was proud of him, but it hadn't occurred to me that, I felt like it was an indicator that there weren't enough gay characters represented in fiction. And I have to say, as a teacher too, I hear so many stories about students who, the sort of experience they have when finally they see themselves represented in fiction, and what a breakthrough that is. And when I wrote my third young adult book, The Boy I Love, to me, it's really a book about friendship, and a book about protecting each other. And hopefully it's interesting because I think now, having written it, it's very much a coming out novel. It's not the kind of novel that you were looking for in a post-gay world. But I think of it sort of as a piece of transition literature that almost makes me hope that 10 years from now the book will be totally dated, because the issues that are raised in it won't be a big deal. And I'm actually very, very hopeful for that. I think if I look at the attitudes of have a daughter who's turning 12, and I don't think that for her or her friends it would occur to them that being gay was anything other than something that's totally normal and fine to be. So that's all I have to say right now until questions. Yeah.
I can probably do this without this. Can you all hear me? Okay. I come at all of this from a very different angle. I taught junior high in an urban Title I school in Miami, and I'm one of the few people I know that has actually taught LGBTQ-themed literature in classrooms. I used to teach a unit with a book called The Geography Club, and so I come at it as an educator and a researcher of trying to empirically show why it's important to have these books available in schools to young adults, really to decrease and hopefully eventually, in a post-gay world, eliminate the culture of violence that LGBTQ teens face. There's a whole slew of statistics we could go through about suicide rates, eating disorder rates with teens of that nature. And so I guess I'll tell you a little bit about some research I've done, and then if you're more interested when we get to questions, if I don't bore you, if I start going into statistics, just kick me. I did one study that I'm in the process of writing up, which looked at the effect of an instructional unit of the Geography Club on adolescents' homophobia, which is very similar to a study I did with rape myth acceptance. It came out significant, right? Because now one of the things that comes up in the circles I run in with young adult literature in a group called ALAN, which is part of NCTE, is in a very general way, there appear to be two audiences for LGBTQ-themed young adult literature. One audience are teens who consider themselves LGBTQ. The other audience is for basically everybody else, okay? And I think it's important because in a lot of literary circles, that second group sometimes gets denigrated. But as a teacher, I wasn't very interested in preaching to the choir because the choir wasn't going to beat the tar out of each other in the hallway, whereas the students who were homophobic were. And that's really what I wanted to do. From that study, and it did, it lowered homophobia. We could talk about the types of books you can pick that you could do in a school, but I had homophobic males and gangs say to me, Mel, this book's really gay. And I'd say, well, yeah, it is. I told you that before. If you don't want to read it, you can read something else. No, 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 no. Because there was so much good writing and good story. And how many of you have read the Geography Club? So I hope you agree with me. And if not, it's okay too. But with that said, right, I worked in Miami. I had a contract that protected my academic freedom. They could not tell me not to teach it, okay? Academic freedom is something that is in grave danger in our nation due to not just homophobia that's been around for a long time, but due to the corporatization of education, where if it's all teaching to the test, there aren't going to be a lot of LGBTQ themed issues on the test, right? Much in the same way that they try and make the test multicultural by changing Jack and Jill to Jill and Jamal, right? But everything else is the same, but they think they're multicultural. Okay? And so in that, I've done some research on teachers' attitudes toward it. I have a piece that I'm working on that basically I did a mixed methods, looking at reasons teachers would and would not want to use it, and used a funky little analysis called Q Factor to kind of develop archetypes, if you want to say, of teachers' attitudes. One was reticent, which we would expect, and then among two groups that were willing, one group of pre-service teachers were uncomfortable having the discussions of it, right? So they really didn't feel that they were prepared to manage discussions that could be controversial in nature. And the other group that was willing, which I think you touched on in terms of transgender, is they were very uncomfortable because I asked specific types of characters, protagonist who's gay, protagonist who's lesbian, protagonist who's bisexual. They came up very uncomfortable doing books with transgender protagonists. All of the groups were very uncomfortable assigning books for students to purchase for class, which really comes to they don't want to be found out by the parents that they're teaching this kind of material. So that's one thing I've done. Another thing I do is with October Morning, that Katie here wrote a fantastic teacher's guide to, okay? Where, and if you've had me in young adult lit, a lot of them, I'll have you do a social justice oriented kind of project using October Morning by Leslie Ann Newman as a mentor text. And I did a qualitative study of that, looking at what themes students write in their poetry books. And one of the things that came up was suicide as a theme. And during the instructional unit down at a high school in Miami, because can you believe it, I couldn't get anybody here to do it? Exactly how you feel. One of their transgender students went to a very liberal college in the Northeast and committed suicide, after going through years of bullying and being isolated. So I come to it from a very pragmatic point of, I want to show that there is a measurable positive effect in having these books in schools.
I would just say a few words about my project. I don't know. This is worse. Is this worse if I speak with the mic, or is it better if I just... Better? Okay. This is the book that I just won the award for Tiger Girl, and this is all about the intersectionality. If minority literature is in ethnic minorities in YA literature is less than 2%, it's 1.9% of the titles have a character who's not white. And so if you want to think about a character who's not white and also queer, that's like the tiniest percentage. And then also if you want to think about who really doesn't get represented, like Cambodian refugees. And so this is a book about Cambodian refugees in America. And there are also queer characters, and including a transgender character. So yes, I hit the trifecta of underrepresented minorities in this book, and I did it deliberately. I had actually done a previous book about a Cambodian refugee family who survived the Khmer Rouge and ended up running a restaurant in the Midwest in America. And it had done well enough that the publisher wanted a sequel. And so then I got to thinking about, oh, what can I add that I hadn't had in before? And so I was doing research in, because I'm not Cambodian, you know, I should say that straight up. I am not Cambodian. It was inspired by Cambodian family and refugees that I had worked with starting when I was a teenager living in the Midwest in the 1980s. And I had promised to tell a woman's story about how her children had died in the killing fields before she could escape to a refugee camp in Thailand. And I had promised that when I was a teenager, and I really couldn't fulfill that until I was in my, 40s. And I was able to write the first book in this series, Dragon Chica. And then so I was doing more research, interviewing, there's a very large Cambodian population in San Francisco where I was living. And I was conducting interviews with various survivors and their families, and a woman had brought up the issue, like she doesn't know how her husband's going to react to her son, who she thought was gay. And he wanted to spend a lot of time with the monks at the local Wat, and she kept encouraging him to date. He said, "Oh no, mommy, I don't want to, I don't need to date. I'm gonna just go back, with the monks." And she's saying, "I think he might be gay." And she's like, "I don't know how my husband's gonna react." And the other women were like, "Well, we don't know because your husband's Chinese and you know the Chinese." And they're like, "Oh," and the woman's Cambodian saying, "Oh yeah, you know the Chinese." Because in Cambodian culture, traditionally, it's not a problem if you're gay. Because of the Theravada Buddhist tradition in Cambodia and Thailand, there's a very open LGBT community and transgender community, and traditionally there's not been any religious prohibitions against being gay and having gay